The rain hammered relentlessly against the old stone walls of St. Mary's Church, the sky above a heavy blanket of dark clouds that swallowed every trace of moonlight. Water streamed down the steps in thin, glistening rivers, gathering in icy pools at the bottom. Each gust of wind cut like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, rattling the iron gate and whistling through the cracks in the church's towering doors. The courtyard was deserted, every sensible person already tucked away somewhere warm and bright. But on the cold stone steps, a young woman sat curled tightly against one of the pillars, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. Her knees were drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them as though she could hold herself together from the outside. A faded backpack sat beneath her chin, the frayed straps looped around her wrists like she was afraid someone might take it. Her clothes were soaked, through thin jeans clinging to her legs, a sweatshirt heavy with rain, its sleeves stretched and torn. Her shoes squished with water every time she shifted, and her fingers, pale and stiff, trembled relentlessly as she tried to warm them with her breath. Each exhale came out shaky and white, disappearing instantly into the freezing air. Hours earlier, she had cried until her throat burned and her eyes swelled, but the tears had long since run dry. Now, her face was blank, hollow, as if she had slipped somewhere far inside herself, where pain no longer needed permission to exist. Her cheeks were streaked with the remnants of mascara, black threads tracing down to her chin. Every now and then, her body shuddered on its own, exhausted, starved, and ice-cold to the core. Cars sped past on the slick street beyond the gates, spraying water against the curb. Headlights flashed across the courtyard, illuminating her for a moment before disappearing again, leaving her in darkness. A couple walked by under a large umbrella, their eyes flicking toward her briefly before darting away, quickly crossing the road rather than walking past the church steps. She heard one whisper, "Poor thing," but they didn't stop. No one ever did. Her stomach growled painfully, twisting into a tight knot, but she barely reacted. Hunger had become a dull ache she was no longer surprised by. Her body sagged against the pillar, each breath shallower than the last, as though she was slowly sinking into herself. She watched raindrops land on her backpack, one after another, until the fabric darkened completely and water trickled down her arm. She blinked slowly, heavy eyelids fighting to stay open. She wondered how many more nights she would survive like this, how much longer she could last without sleep, without food, without someone caring whether she lived or vanished into the storm. The thought drifted through her mind without weight, numb and quiet. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, and she pressed her forehead against her knees, wishing, just once, that someone would stop. The heavy wooden doors of St. Mary's Church groaned as they opened, spilling warm, golden light into the cold, wet evening. The scent of candle wax and old wood wafted into the damp air, mingling with the faint aroma of rain-soaked stone. A family emerged, their laughter and chatter, soft but bright against the oppressive quiet of the empty courtyard. The mother, tall and careful, held an umbrella at an angle that shielded both herself and the father, who carried a small tote bag. Between them walked a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, her small hand clutching a stuffed bunny tightly against her chest. The rain-slicked steps reflected the church's light, shimmering beneath their feet. But the little girl's gaze was elsewhere, fixed on the corner where the young woman sat shivering. The mother noticed the pause first. She tugged lightly at her daughter's sleeve, a silent cue to move along. "Come on, sweetie," she said softly, smiling down at her. But the girl didn't budge. She tilted her head, eyes wide, studying the woman on the steps. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips pursed as if she were trying to understand something far older and heavier than her years. The young woman's shoulders were hunched, hands clasping her knees, wet hair plastered against her face. The child's small heart clenched at the sight, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and something deeper, a sense of unfairness at the harshness of the world outside the safety of warm lights and dry shoes. Her parents continued down the steps, chatting quietly, thinking she followed, but she didn't. She stayed rooted, the bunny clutched against her chest like a shield, rain running down the hood of her coat, dripping onto her small shoes. Her eyes never left the woman, studying the way her body shivered uncontrollably, the way her gaze seemed empty, almost far away. The girl's hand twitched, wanting to reach out, but she kept it firmly at her side. She understood, in her own innocent way, that this was someone in need, someone very alone, someone who had been ignored by the world in a way she could not yet articulate. The girl's mother glanced back after a few steps, noticing her daughter still paused at the top of the steps. "Hanny," she called gently, concern threading her voice. The girl shook her head, her gaze unwavering. She could feel the woman's pain even from a distance, a rawness that didn't require words. Her small chest rose and fell rapidly as her mind wrestled with what to do. The street, slick and dark, was empty of anyone else, and the only sound apart from the rain was the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional distant car. The young girl's eyes softened. She took a slow step forward, then another, carefully, ignoring her mother's calls. Her tiny shoes made no sound against the wet stone as she climbed the steps, each movement deliberate, unhesitant. The golden glow from the church framed her small frame like a halo, but she wasn't thinking of light or warmth. She was thinking only of the woman sitting alone, shivering and invisible to everyone else. In that moment, the child's small heart held a courage and empathy far beyond her years, a quiet determination that would bridge the chasm of loneliness. Surrounding the woman, the little girl's footsteps were soft against the slick stone steps, nearly drowned out by the steady patter of rain and the distant hum of the city. Each step brought her closer to the young woman, whose world seemed contained entirely in the small, shivering cocoon she had wrapped herself in. The woman's head lifted slightly as the faint sound of approaching feet reached her ears, her dark eyes scanning the empty courtyard, expecting only shadows or the reflection of passing cars in the puddles. But then she saw a small figure pause just a few feet away, tiny and wet, holding something pressed tightly to her chest. The girl's hood slipped back, letting droplets of rain streak her blonde hair across her face, and the woman blinked, uncertain if she was seeing what her mind wanted to deny. The child's gaze met hers directly, large and unwavering, brimming with something impossible to ignore, concern. The woman tried to look away, to fold herself smaller, to vanish, but she couldn't. There was something arresting about the little girl, something that drew warmth from her very core, despite the chill soaking through her clothes. The child's voice, soft yet steady, cut through the rain. "Are you okay?" It was simple, almost painfully so, but it carried an understanding that startled the young woman. No one had ever asked her that question in months. No one had truly seen her. Not really. The young woman's throat tightened, a lump forming that made speech impossible at first. She swallowed, forcing out a whisper that trembled against the cold. "No, I don't think I am." The words barely rose above the rain, yet they hung between them, solid and vulnerable. The little girl didn't flinch, didn't recoil or look away. Instead, she stepped a fraction closer, her eyes shining with empathy, her tiny hand gripping the stuffed bunny more tightly, as though it were armor for her courage. She didn't rush, didn't push, but she didn't retreat either. She simply stood there, giving the young woman permission to feel, permission to exist in that moment without pretense. The woman's chest heaved, a quiet sob escaping despite herself, and for the first time in hours, her body reacted without restraint. Her tears, previously paused by sheer exhaustion, began to flow again, streaking down her face in hot, wet lines that mixed with the rain. The girl's expression softened, her lips parting in the tiniest hint of a smile, not patronizing, but gentle, grounding, reassuring. The young woman's hands twitched, unsure whether to push the girl away or to let the warmth that radiated from her small frame seep in. Minutes seemed to stretch, the rain drumming around them like a distant drum, the world beyond fading into background noise. The woman's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and the child's presence became a tether to reality, a fragile but undeniable connection. It was as if the little girl's gaze alone had carved a space of safety out of the storm, a place where despair could be acknowledged and held, not ignored or dismissed. The woman's eyes, glassy with tears, remained locked on the child, searching for answers she hadn't known she needed, feeling a strange, hesitant hope stirring where numbness had lived. The girl lifted her hand slightly, tentative, as if asking permission. The young woman blinked, uncertainty giving way to something new and unspoken acceptance. The first bridge between two strangers, a fragile thread of trust, had been formed in the pouring rain. The little girl took a careful step closer, her small frame soaked through but unbothered by the cold, her eyes locked on the young woman as though nothing else in the world existed. "I think you need a hug," she said. Softly, her voice barely rising above the steady patter of rain, yet imbued with a certainty that startled the woman. The words were simple, almost childlike in their honesty, yet they carried a weight the young woman hadn't felt in months. She froze, the wind and rain seeming to fade into a quiet hush around her, leaving only the presence of this tiny, determined stranger. The young woman's hands trembled as she considered the offer, unsure if she even remembered what it felt like to be held without judgment or pity. Her eyes darted down at the girl, noting the innocent resolve on her face, the damp hair clinging to her forehead, and the stuffed bunny pressed under her arm as though it were a shield for courage. There was no fear in the child's expression, no hesitation, only a simple, unwavering belief that a hug could somehow make things better. And in that moment, the young woman realized she had forgotten how to believe in anything simple, how to allow herself to be comforted. Slowly, almost tentatively, the little girl stretched her arms around the woman's shoulders. At first, the young woman stiffened, startled by the small, warm weight pressing against her, the gentleness of it. Then, almost imperceptibly, her body began to relax, muscles uncoiling that she hadn't realized had been knotted for so long. She lowered her face to the girl's shoulder, letting herself breathe in the faint scent of hair dampened by rain and the faint, comforting aroma of the child's coat. A soft, shaky sob escaped her, raw and unguarded, a sound she hadn't made, in public or perhaps ever in months. The child held on without fear, without complaint, as though her small frame were a lifeline strong enough to carry the woman's entire burden. The rain continued to fall around them, a curtain of water that felt suddenly less hostile, less isolating. For the first time, the young woman felt a thread of warmth threading through her chest, unraveling the cold and emptiness that had taken root there. The hug was brief, yet infinite in its simplicity, and it grounded her in a way that words never could. She pressed her face closer, letting the tears soak the child's coat, and the little girl leaned into her, staying steady and unwavering, offering what could only be called pure, uncalculated compassion. The moments stretched, timeless, until the young woman could feel a shift inside herself, fragile, tentative hope. It wasn't salvation or a solution, but it was the first flicker of connection she had allowed herself, in what felt like an eternity. She realized that, even amidst the storm, even in her brokenness, there existed a small point of light. The child's small arms were more than a hug. They were a bridge back to humanity, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world, even for someone like her. As she clung to the little girl, her sobs soft into quiet, shaky breaths. Her hands, once tense and clutched around her knees, now rested lightly on the child's shoulders, hesitant but grateful. For the first time in months, the young woman felt the heavy weight of loneliness lift, if only a little, replaced by something fragile and vital. The warmth of being seen, of being held, and of being cared for, without question or condition. In the middle of the storm, on the cold church steps, she allowed herself to simply exist in the embrace, and for that brief moment, it was enough. The mother's hurried footsteps splashed across the wet stone steps, her voice trembling with worry as she called to her daughter, "Sweetie, are you all right?" But when she reached the top, she froze. There, under the rain, she saw the little girl wrapped in the young woman's arms, both figures framed by the golden glow spilling from the church doors. The sight was both unexpected and strangely beautiful, a moment of tenderness so pure, it seemed almost impossible in the harsh, cold world outside. The mother's heart swelled with relief and awe, and a soft, understanding smile spread across her face. She stepped closer, careful not to disturb the fragile scene, and placed a gentle hand on the young woman's back. The warmth of her touch was steady and reassuring. "Come inside," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm authority that promised safety. "You don't have to sit out here anymore." The young woman looked up, startled. Her eyes, still glossy with tears, met the mother's, and she felt a wave of disbelief mixed with gratitude. No one had ever offered her help like this, so freely, without expectation, without judgment. The offer was a bridge to a life she had thought lost, a lifeline extended when she had almost given up. The little girl released her arms slowly, stepping back but keeping one hand lightly on the woman's arm, a gentle tether of continuity. The young woman blinked, hesitant, unsure whether she deserved such kindness. But the warmth in their eyes, the softness in their voices, the golden light of the church, all of it pulled at something deep inside her, a fragile hope that had been buried beneath months of fear and despair. She nodded slightly, the first conscious, deliberate movement she had made in hours, and allowed herself to be guided toward the church doors. As they walked, the rain still falling around them, the mother opened the door wide, letting a rush of warmth, light, and the faint scent of incense envelop them. The inside of the church was quiet, except for the soft hum of a distant choir, and the golden light illuminated wooden pews and stone floors, casting long shadows that seemed welcoming rather than cold. The young woman's wet clothes clung to her, but the warmth inside seeped into her bones, thawing the chill that had become a constant companion. The little girl squeezed her hand gently, giving her the courage to take the next step, to move away from the storm outside and towards something she hadn't felt in months. Security. The mother guided them to a small bench near the back, offering blankets and hot tea that smelled faintly of honey and herbs. The young woman's hands shook as she accepted them, but there was no embarrassment, no shame, only a tentative gratitude. She wrapped herself in the blanket, feeling its dry warmth seep into her damp clothes and chilled skin, and sipped the tea carefully, the taste grounding her. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt Selenite as a problem, not as a burden, but as a person worthy of care. She glanced at the little girl, whose eyes were wide with innocence, yet filled with quiet strength, and felt a strange, profound bond form. In that moment, amidst the golden light, the warmth of the church, and the gentle embrace of strangers who had shown her kindness, the young woman realized something astonishing. She was no longer alone. She had been found, not through grand gestures or words, but through a simple, human act of compassion that had the power to change everything.